forebrain, and a smaller portion here as midbrain. Then these 1, 2, and 3 are the parts of the hindbrain. So 3 parts of the brain: forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. We will take first forebrain. Forebrain contains what? Or it consists of what? The cerebrum as a whole. And if I open it, this area diencephalon. Okay? Cerebrum, and this inner part is diencephalon. Okay? Then these two have further parts, but we'll do that later. First, I want to finish with the parts. Then this small portion, which is above my index finger, below the diencephalon, a small quadrangular portion between the 2 fingers, you can see this is midbrain, only a small portion. And below the midbrain, with the cerebellum, pons, medulla, this is hindbrain. Medulla below continues with the spinal cord, and we have done the spinal cord in detail before. Okay. Now these 3 parts of the brain has further division, so we will go for the further. The collective part of the forebrain cerebrum, if we divide it into 2 halves, it becomes half cerebral hemisphere. Okay, cerebral hemisphere. Half is hemisphere. Hemi means half. Sphere is a rounded ball. Okay, so one part is hemisphere. Together is cerebrum. When we separate the hemispheres, we can see inside the diencephalon. This diencephalon, if you look at this rounded structure, this is thalamus. Below this we have hypothalamus, and above the black one that you see, pineal gland, is epithalamus. 3 parts of diencephalon: thalamus, hypothalamus, this area, many structures are there, and epithalamus, the pineal gland, which we have already done in the endocrine also. Hypothalamus also we have done in endocrine. Then there is a hanging pituitary, okay? So that is our endocrine, we have done that. Then coming to the midbrain, which is a very small area, but the cavity is just a slit-like or a tube-like in the midbrain. This cavity is called cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct, a small canal-like space in the midbrain cerebral aqueduct. Below this aqueduct is continuous with a triangle. Half is triangle, when both sides it becomes diamond shape. 4th ventricle. 4th ventricle become continue with the central canal in medulla and in the brain. Now this cerebral aqueduct upward, when the 2 parts will join each other here in the center between the 2 diencephalon, this cavity will become 3rd ventricle, and this is the diencephalon having the 3rd ventricle. If I remove this cerebrum, inside you see there is a cavity which is lateral ventricle. What is this? Lateral ventricle. Okay, lateral ventricle. So there are 1 lateral ventricle here, 1 lateral ventricle here. Okay, you can see it here. 2 lateral ventricles, and then the diencephalon, between the diencephalon is the 3rd ventricle, then there is the cavity of the midbrain, then the cavity 4th ventricle, and then in medulla. So these are the ventricular system structures that you see. Other than this, what we observe here, the hindbrain has 3 parts: cerebellum, pons, medulla. Pons means bridge. Okay, so this is between the medulla and the midbrain, so this is bridging. That's why we call it as bridge, pons. Okay, and medulla is the lower conical part. Here, the skull, when finished foramen magnum, below the foramen magnum, it will become the spinal cord. Okay. Coming to the cerebellum, which is one of the part of the hind brain, we can see there are two hemispheres in cerebellum also. Like this. Cerebellum is also having two hemispheres. Yes, okay, which are joined in the center. In the center there is a union. Okay. Now this union in the center is called vermis. 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 V-E-R-M-I-S. Vermis. And the two hemispheres has lobes also. This we have done last time. The lobes are anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flocculonodular lobe. Again I will repeat. Anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flocculonodular lobe. Three lobes are there in the one hemisphere of cerebellum, joined to the other hemisphere by the area called vermis. Here also we have anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flocculonodular lobe. In the cerebellum also, outer is gray and inside you can see white fibers. These white fibers of the cerebellum are called arbor vitae. V-A-R-B-O-R-V-I-T-A-E, written in the lectures. You must have seen it. Arbor vitae, the white fibers in the cerebellum. This much about cerebellum, pons and medulla is enough. If we remove the cerebellum, and the cerebrum, the remaining what is we call the brain stem. Midbrain, pons, medulla. Three are called as brain stem. Like you hold a flower. You know what is a flower? Flower?
Yeah.
Okay, like a rose. This is the flower. Then there is a stem and there is a leaf. Okay, just like that. You have a stem, midbrain, pons, medulla, leaf like the cerebellum, and the flower like the cerebrum. The diencephalon here serves as, if you have seen, there is a green thick thing inside the flower with which all the petals are attached. That is like the diencephalon. Okay? Okay? You understand now? So this is how we have a brain stem and we have the different parts of the brain. Then coming to the ventricular system again, I told you every part of the brain has its cavity. So the cerebrum has a cavity, lateral ventricle. Between the two diencephalon, the cavity is third ventricle. In the midbrain, the cavity is a small duct, cerebral aqueduct. And in the hindbrain or the brain stem, you can see below, the cavity is fourth ventricle. Okay? These are the cavities. And if you open your slides, you will see there is a structure called choroid plexus, the blue color, which will secrete the CSF. This blue color structure, which is the pia mater, ependyma of the pia mater with the capillary. Here also in the lateral ventricle inside, you can see the choroid plexus. So in the lateral ventricle and in the third ventricle, plus in the fourth ventricle, you can see choroid plexus that is responsible to produce the CSF, the fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, okay, to circulate around the brain and spinal cord and to be there inside the ventricles. This is one thing. I told you that the lateral ventricles are very near to each other, just there is a septum separating them, septum pellucidum. Okay, it's written in your slides. This is the thin septum that separates, if you see the two lateral ventricle like this, just separated by each other by a thin septum. by a thin septum. This is the thin septum called septum pellucidum. Okay, septum pellucidum, a thin septum separating the two lateral ventricles. Okay, then we have we come to what the other parts, that is the cerebral hemispheres. To discuss about this, have a look that this hemisphere has a frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. If I close it like this, okay, if I close it like this, there is one big fissure separating the two hemispheres. This big fissure is called longitudinal fissure. Then there is a transverse fissure which is separating the cerebellum from the cerebrum. Then there is a lateral sulcus which is separating the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobes. Okay? Then if you see a large central sulcus is running. There are many sulci, but how will you identify the central? It comes till here and goes till the lateral sulcus. This is the only one which reach both the point. The other either reach up or reach below, but do not reach to both the ends. Okay? The central sulcus, anterior to this is frontal lobe, responsible for motor function, the FM. Okay, frontal for motor. Then we have parietal lobe. The parieto-occipital sulcus is there. Parietal lobe responsible for sensory function. Then occipital lobe for the vision to see. Temporal lobe for having the speech and the olfactory inside and speech and hearing. And I told you that if you separate the lateral sulcus inside, you can identify a lobe, and this lobe is called as, if you remove the central sulcus here, you see another lobe, insula. Insula is a hidden lobe. Hidden lobe, when you remove or separate like this, the temporal and the parietal lobes inside the central sulcus, you will see this lobe which is hidden, insula. Okay? So, lobes of cerebrum: frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, and insula. Okay? Then motor function by frontal lobe, sensory function by parietal lobe. Okay? And other than this is the medial side, this is the lateral side. Other white matter fibers are smaller, you cannot see them, but this one white matter fiber, which is a commissure fiber connecting the right hemisphere with the left one, this white C-shaped fiber called corpus callosum. C-shape, commissure again with C, corpus callosum again with C. If I ask you in exam, what is this? You will say this is white matter fiber in the cerebrum. What is the name? This is a commissure fiber. What is the type? This is a commissure fiber. What is the name? This is corpus callosum. Okay? So this is how here you can see it again. Corpus callosum, the diencephalon, the choroid plexus. So that's it about the important structures. Last time I also told you about the nerves. If you see here, I said that you need to identify only the important ones, which are only not the important one, important are all, but the larger one you have to identify, and that's enough for you as a pharmacy students. If I remove this, yes, the blood supply, we can see this one big nerve, first nerve. olfaction, smell. Second bigger nerve, optic, for eye. Then third, for again movement of eye. Then this one, large. Fifth, trigeminal. Fourth, we can see here. Fifth, trigeminal. Here, if you see it, circulate, there are Roman letters written. Roman, you know?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 5 is like a V. So with the Roman letters, it's written 5. Then 6, 7, 8. 6, 7, 8. Abducent, facial, vestibulocochlear. Then 9, 10, 11. 9, 10, 11. Glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory. And then 12. So we can identify 1, first cranial nerve, 2, second cranial nerve, third cranial nerve, fourth, fifth, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. 12 cranial nerves are here. For your to be easier for you, if you know all or you don't know all, that is okay. For theory purpose, you need to know them. But for the practical purpose, number 1, olfactory, smell, you have to know. Number 2, optic, vision, you have to know. And number 5, trigeminal, which is the bigger one here. You need to know that is sensory for the face. And this is what? If you remember, I told you there are arteries supplying the brain. There are arteries supplying the brain. These are the vessels which are supplying the brain. Internal carotid and vertebral. Internal carotid and vertebral supplying the whole of the brain. That's it. Any question?
Thank you.